Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce myself first. My name is Bensar Aditya Nurfallah, and I'm from Education University of Indonesia. In this very humble occasion, I would like to give you guys a speech about this recent and yet phenomenal issue of human rights, or specifically the black rights. And initially, let us praise the presence of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who have bestowed the pleasure, health, opportunities, and the happiness for all of us. Because without this grace and mercy, it is impossible for us to do all of this. And next, I would like to thank my lecturer, Mr. Chep Ubad, for the humble privilege of allowing me to say quite a few words about this very topic. And the main topic of this speech is the Black Lives Matter, or the BLM movement. So first, I would like to explain what and who the black community is. The black people, also known as the Afro-American people, or generally known as blacks, are American people with partial or total African ancestry who live in America. After white Americans, Afro-Americans are the second largest racial group in the US, and after Hispanic and Latino Americans, they are the third largest ethnic group in America. The majority of Afro-Americans are descendants of enslaved individuals who live within the United States borders, and Afro-American history dates back to the 16th century when West Afro-Americans were sold to European slave traders and transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the 13 colonies. They were sold as slaves to European colonists and forced to work on plantation, primarily in the southern colonies in America. Before and after or during the American Revolution, a few people were able to acquire independence by manumission or flight and found autonomous towns. But they received citizenship and the right to vote during Reconstruction, but due to white supremacy, they were primarily viewed as second-class citizens and were quickly disenfranchised in the South of America. Participation in U.S. military operations, major migration out of the South, the abolition of legal racial segregation, and the civil rights movement that sought political and social freedom all transformed in these circumstances. So, ladies and gentlemen, did you guys know what exactly is the Black Lives Matter movement? Well, the Black Lives Matter is a term, and more importantly, a hashtag, used to draw attention to the racism, injustice, and inequality that black people are facing nowadays. The BLM supporters point to the reality that in the United States, black people are far more likely to be shot and killed by police than white people. They claim that they face a variety of additional forms of discrimination in the United States and many other countries. They want action to be taken to correct historical injustice and oppression that date back to slavery, which still continue to exist today. Its popularity developed in the United States following high-profile police killings, but it also has been used in the United Kingdom and many other countries, or somewhere else. The BLM movement is motivated by historical wrongdoings that their forefathers endured, which they blame on white Americans up until now. They accuse white Americans of racism in the past and now, so many people interpret the slogan Black Lives Matter as a call to ensure that all Americans, particularly oppressed African Americans, that they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They also use the BLM hashtag on social media and carrying BLM placard during protests and donate money to the organization. The victims who have brought attention to the tremendous challenges of racism that this country faces are the names most associated with Black Lives Matter, such as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, and Michael Brown, to mention a few. So how has this movement grown so fast? Well, the campaign began in 2013, following George Zimmerman's acquittal in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin in Florida. The 17-year-old kid had just returned from the store where he had purchased sweets and a nice drinks. But according to Mr. Zimmerman, the unarmed black teenager appears suspicious, and that's why he shouted. If Trayvon Martin's death sparked Black Lives Matter, no, it's not. It was Michael Brown's death a year later that really brought the movement to the public's notice. Because after an unarmed kid was shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, Black Lives Matter flocked to the streets, frequently clashing with the police. However, the assassination of George Floyd propelled the movement into previously uncharted territory, to a bigger and even wider problem. When he was acquitted of murder, there was fury, and a Facebook post titled Black Lives Matter caught the emotion and attention for people to take prompted action. And a year ago, in 2020, the police killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor sparked a historic wave of activism across the US, with an estimated 8,000 mass protests in support of BLM, and the footage of George Floyd's killing at the hands of Minneapolis cops sparked worldwide through the social media. It drew additional attention to high-profile Black American killings over the last decade, as well as lingering concerns about structural racism in the criminal justice system. After Floyd's death, which occurred in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic that has disproportionately infected and killed Black people, it has highlighted long-standing racial disparities in every facet of American life and compelled a serious reckoning across society. Corporations have made commitments to combat systematic racism inside their organizations. Some communities are considering budget cuts to their police department, and activists have revived their request for Confederate monuments to be removed, and some people have to topple the sculptures themselves. Also, segregation by money magnifies segregation by race, trapping low-income Blacks in communities that suffer from a variety of disadvantage, including violent crime. As a result, the chasm between Black people has grown even wider. For example, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 46% of African Americans reside in high poverty areas, or areas with a poverty rate of at least 40%. Black people are approximately 20 times more likely to be shot and 9 times more likely to be murdered than white people. As Jill Yaffe, a journalist for the Los Angeles Times, points out in her 2014 book Genocide, she says, "This is one of our criminal justice systems, if not our entire society's greatest moral failures. There are thousands poor African American families who have lost loved ones, but still they are frequently overlooked and ignored, especially by the media." So, do people support the BLM organization? The answer is yes. Of course, some people have supported this organization, and some people don't. Many people have stated that they used the Black Lives Matter hashtag or protested in order to oppose racism, not to promote the organization. For example, in response to criticism of England's kneeling, defender Tyron Ming said, "It's never been about supporting the organization Black Lives Matter. People use that as a cheap argument against the movement." According to Professor Deva Woodley of the New York Times, the Black Lives Matter organization typically offered materials and guidance to demonstrators, but it did not organize all of the marches. While supporters points out that most marches have been peaceful, conservative, but US politicians and TV pundits have stated that Black Lives Matter is to blame for police officer fatalities. Well, this is true, and we're targeting the cruel system of policing, not individual cops, the BLM organization stated. Despite the existence of an official BLM organization in the UK, activities are frequently organized by a number of smaller groups or people united under the banner of Black Lives Matter. There's also critics who claim that all lives matter or white lives matter too, are disregarding that the consequences of slavery and racial inequality that happened to black people. They also had said that the term is the demand for equal treatment and an end to racism, because black people's lives are just as valuable as everyone else's, the BLM supporters said. And then what has this organization achieved? This organization has achieved that steps have been taken in the US to address police violence and improve the way laws are enforced. Following George Floyd's death, the phrase "defund the cops" became popular. In cities such as Minneapolis, Portland, Philadelphia, and Seattle have begun moving police funds to other sectors such as schools and housing. The demonstrations in the United Kingdom brought attention to the country's colonial heritage, and statues of those associated with the slave trade were desecrated. The other result that this BLM organization has achieved is reaching and helping black people who suffer from issues such as being negatively impacted by coronavirus. The issue has also brought to light how companies can fall short at times, and from 2022, all Welsh schools will be required to teach Black history. Teachers in England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland now have the option of teaching Black history. Books about Black people's problems become top sellers, and for some people, Black Lives Matter also means starting difficult conversations about racism with friends or their family. So, why does Black Lives Matter matters? Of course, because I would like to say that every human being deserves the same change and the same rights, as it was engraved on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948. Article 1 of the UDHR states clearly that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Moreover, Article 2 affirms that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, property, national or social origin, birth, or other status. And the most important thing is Article 3, which cites that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Aligning to Article 6, Paragraph 1 of ICCPR, it stated that every human being has the inherent right to life. This right shall be protected by law, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. Those were international human rights instruments are just a few examples of the many international human rights laws that the US government and the rest of the governments around the world are obliged to ratify and apply in their national constitutions. So, to conclude this speech, I would like to say that humanity is at stake. We must coexist and live peacefully. There is no place for racism and discrimination in this world. So, let's make the world a better place. Heal the world, but remember, all lives matter. So, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much for your attention.